Welcome to Dining with Diabetes at Florida Hospital Diabetes Institute. Today I am very happy to introduce a vegan cook who's going to share with you a very interesting, delicious, and healthful recipe. Her name is Joy Bochner, and we are so happy that she has come to share her time and her talent with us.
Today we're going to make vegan crab cakes, which are remarkably similar in flavor to their non-vegan counterparts. And we're going to replace the crab with chickpeas, which add fiber and the right texture, and also with tofu. If you haven't worked with tofu before, you can find it either in your refrigerator section of the grocery store where I got this, and I prefer the texture and the freshness of refrigerated tofu, or you can find it in a box in the Asian food section. And there are a few different kinds of tofu. Extra firm or firm is best if you're going to grill it or roast it or use it in some kind of loaf or a patty. And the silken or soft tofu is best for baking, for purees like in a salad dressing or a pudding. We're going to use extra firm tofu today, and the first thing you need to do is you need to drain it really well. First we're going to drain it over here at the sink. First we're going to drain it at the sink just by perforating the package, and you can see it's been stored in water, but there's still a lot of water inside this block of tofu, so we're going to press it between two heavy plates. So we're just going to take our block of tofu, put it between the two plates, and then take a nice heavy cookbook, and we're just going to leave it here for 15 to 20 minutes. And at the end, you'll see we'll have about a half cup water that's going to pour right off of that. And that will improve the texture so it's not mushy when we cook with it. Next, you're going to mince half of a large onion fine, and also mince a quarter cup of celery fine, and we're going to saute them on low heat while our tofu's draining until they're soft and translucent. I usually use 1 to 2 tablespoons olive oil to do this. I start with 1, and then we can add a little more later if we like, and if you want to use less oil, you could just add a tablespoon of water if they dry out. So after we've heated our oil up and it's nice and runny, we're going to put in our onions and our celery. If you want these to just start to brown but not to brown very much, you can leave them and come back and stir them periodically while we're moving on to our next step. We're going to take a 15-ounce can of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, and we're just going to drain them in a strainer and rinse them really well. So we're going to put these chickpeas into a big bowl, and we're going to alternate now between mashing the chickpeas and watching our vegetables. And these are still nice and moist, which is great. They're still releasing their water. Now we're going to mash our chickpeas, and this is the hardest part of this recipe, but it's really important because it creates that crab-like texture. You could puree the chickpeas, but then your patties would be a lot blander in texture and they might fall apart a little more. So I find a large fork is the easiest way to do this. Some people prefer a potato masher, but I find they just jam it up. By the time we finished cooking the onions and mashing the chickpeas, our tofu should be sufficiently dry. So you'll see we can just drain it, and a huge amount of water is going to come out. And then it'll be a little bit flatter, but otherwise basically the same. This recipe uses half a block of tofu, so I'm now going to cut this in half. We're going to put 1/2 of our tofu in with our chickpeas, and now a potato masher is great. We're going to use that to both mash the tofu and blend it in with the chickpeas so they're evenly distributed. And you want to make sure you don't have any big bits of tofu because they will, again, like the whole chickpeas, be a little bland. If everything's mashed up real nicely, it will blend perfectly with the spices and the onions and the celery. Now we have our protein base, and we're going to add all of our flavorings and seasonings and binders in. So first we're going to add the onions and celery we've sauteed. Now we're going to add 1/3 cup of breadcrumbs. I'm using gluten-free breadcrumbs. You can also use whole grain breadcrumbs, whatever your preference is. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder, which keeps these a little bit light. If you want your cakes to have a little bit of a heavier texture, you could leave this out. We're going to add 2 teaspoons Old Bay, and if you've ever made regular crab cakes, this will be familiar. Gives them their distinctive seasoning. We're going to add 1/2 teaspoon celery seed, which is a little old-fashioned, but one of my favorite things to work with. 2 tablespoons of fresh flat leaf parsley, which I've already chopped, and you want to mince that real fine. It adds some nice color and a lot of freshness. And 2 tablespoons of vegan mayonnaise. I use one that combines canola and olive oil. We're going to use 1 tablespoon of vegan Worcestershire sauce. I generally like Annie's or Whole Foods, but any brand you like would be great. Now we're going to mix this all up until it's well blended. Now this is much more complex looking. It has some wonderful flavor and some nice colors in it from the parsley and the slight browning of the onions and celery. So now we're ready to make our actual cakes. So we're going to pour some more of the breadcrumbs into a shallow dish. So we're going to roll our patties in those after we've made them, and we're going to try and make 9 or 10 1/4 cup patties out of this. So you don't want to make them too big. And we're going to roll each one in our breadcrumbs on both sides and stack them on a plate. Now we're going to saute these in a few tablespoons of olive oil just until they start to brown on both sides. And as soon as they're browned, we're going to remove them to a baking tray and bake them for ½ an hour. So this will give them a nice browned look and some good extra flavor, but we won't have to fry them. So nice thing about this recipe, you can usually get your entire recipe into one nice big non-stick saute pan. Now we're going to flip these after they've cooked for a few minutes on one side and they're starting to brown. Once I flip the patties, I sometimes like to add a little more oil all around the pan. It's not necessary, but if I then swirl it around, it will give them more of a brown look on both sides. And as you'll see, due to differences in heat of the pan in various parts, some of these might need to be flipped one more time. Our first cakes are already ready, so we're going to remove them to our baking sheet. And then we're going to move some of these that are cooking really slowly to the center of our pan. Just kind of move them around a little bit. Flip some that haven't cooked so much on the first side. We're going to bake these at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for a ½ hour. And when they come out, they'll be ready to serve. If you want to do a lot of your preparation the day before, you can make the cakes and either freeze them or put them in the refrigerator and then bake them the next day before serving. After you've fried the crab cakes and put them onto a baking sheet, you can either bake them immediately or refrigerate them to bake the next day, or even freeze them and then bake them even the next week or the week after. Because this recipe takes a little bit of work, I often like to make a double recipe and then freeze them in groups of 4, which is what my family will eat in one meal, and take them out and bake them for an easy but delicious dinner. Now we're going to make a very quick version of a traditional remoulade sauce to serve with the crab cakes. We're going to start with a ½ cup of our same vegan mayo. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of reduced sugar ketchup, 3/4 of a teaspoon of Old Bay, and we're going to have to do a 1/2 and a 1/4 here. Then we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed. And finally, we're going to add finely minced, I took 2 scallions and finely minced the white and light green parts. And you just whisk this together and you get a remarkably tasty sauce that makes these crab cakes taste just a little bit decadent, which is always nice. And it looks a lot fancier than it is. After 30 minutes, your crab cake should look like this, and you're going to serve it with a generous tablespoon of remoulade, and you might want to garnish it for color with a little bit of fresh parsley. And I like to serve these with grilled or roasted asparagus on the plate and a little bit of a fresh salad.
Okay, well here comes the fun part. I love crab cakes, so this is going to be a real challenge. This is delicious.
Aren't they? This is one of my favorite things.
Oh my goodness. We'll just keep eating here. Wow.
They're good.
And the sauce is perfect for it. Thank you so much for joining us, sharing your knowledge, sharing this wonderful recipe. It's healthy, and I think people are going to enjoy making it. You're very generous with your time. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I enjoy sharing good food with people and helping people find healthy, creative meals that are delicious as well.
And they're out there, and you just need to show people.